An appeals court has just upheld the $83 million defamation judgment E. Jean Carroll won against President Trump. Let's go live right now to CNN's Kara Scannell. Kara, the president lost the appeal, so what happens now?
Well, the president did lose this appeal, and he already set aside money in order to pay E. Jean Carroll, but the litigation here is most likely not over.
Donald Trump is absolutely erupting in fury right now as an appeals court just upheld the $83 million defamation judgment that E. Jean Carroll won against him. And this is not some distant future payment. This is write the check right now, or we're coming for your assets kind of situation. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled on September 7th and 8th, 2025, and said the verdict stands. No error in the trial, no presidential immunity defense, no free speech protection for defamation, pay up. And Trump predictably lost his mind. Went on Truth Social calling it rigged, called it a witch hunt, said he's taking it to the Supreme Court. But here's the problem. The Supreme Court probably isn't going to take this case. Legal experts are saying it's a long shot, which means he actually has to pay, has to post a bond or start liquidating assets, and that's happening while he's sitting in the Oval Office trying to run the country. And here's what makes this even worse. When you add in the $5 million from the first verdict plus interest that's been accruing this whole time, the total bill is closer to $88 million. That's real money even for him. And he's also dealing with another legal loss that just came through. Over in the UK, the High Court ordered him to pay over $800,000 in legal fees. That's from a defamation suit he filed against Orbis Business Intelligence, the company founded by Christopher Steele, who wrote the Steele dossier. He sued Orbis claiming the dossier was false, but he lost, and the court ordered him to pay their legal fees. So he's getting hit from multiple directions. The Carroll verdict, the UK judgment, all happening while he's supposed to be governing. But real quick, before we get into this, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built John Brown's show to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, please subscribe, because you might think you are, but aren't. Your subscription actually matters here. All right, let's get into what actually happened. This goes back to the original defamation trial in January 2024. E. Jean Carroll, a former magazine columnist, accused him of sexually assaulting her in a department store dressing room back in the 1990s. And he didn't just deny it, he went on the offensive, called her a liar, said she made it up for attention, said she wasn't his type, attacked her credibility over and over on Truth Social and in interviews. Carroll sued him for defamation, said his statements damaged her reputation and caused her emotional distress. The first trial happened in 2023, and the jury found him liable not just for defamation, but for sexual abuse. They awarded Carroll $5 million, and you'd think that would be the end of it, that he would shut up and move on. But no. Instead, he doubled down, kept attacking her, kept calling the case a hoax, kept saying the jury was biased. Share this video with everyone you know, because Carroll's lawyers went back to court and said, hey, he's still defaming her, we need another trial. And they got it. The second trial happened in January 2024, and this time the jury was even less sympathetic because he'd already been found liable once. He'd already lost, and instead of learning his lesson, he just kept going. So the jury came back with a massive verdict, $83.3 million. That's compensatory damages for the harm to Carroll's reputation and punitive damages to punish him and deter him from doing it again. And that number, 83 million, it's designed to hurt. It's designed to make him think twice before attacking someone like this again. But he, of course, appealed. His lawyers argued the trial was unfair, that the judge was biased, that his statements were protected by the First Amendment, that he was immune from lawsuits because he made the statements while he was president. And the appeals court looked at all of those arguments and said, nah, none of that works. The trial was fair, the jury heard the evidence, he defamed Carroll, period, pay the $83 million, and now he's staring down the barrel of an enforceable judgment. And it's not just the $83 million. When you add in the $5 million from the first verdict plus interest that's been accruing this whole time, the total bill is closer to $88 million. That's real money. And this is happening while he's dealing with another legal loss. Over in the UK, the High Court ordered him to pay over $800,000 in legal fees from a defamation suit he filed against Orbis Business Intelligence. That's the company founded by Christopher Steele, the guy who wrote the Steele dossier with all the Russia allegations. He sued Orbis, claiming the dossier was false and defamatory, but he lost. And the court ordered him to pay Orbis's legal fees. Over $600,000 that converts to more than $800,000. Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown Show because he's getting hit from multiple directions. The Carroll verdict, the UK judgment, all of this happening while he's supposed to be governing, while he's supposed to be focused on policy, while he's supposed to be leading the country. Instead, he's dealing with court orders demanding he write checks for tens of millions of dollars, and that's distracting, that's embarrassing, and that's exactly what his opponents want. Because every time he has to talk about these lawsuits, every time he has to defend himself against accusations of defamation and sexual abuse, he's not talking about his policy wins. He's not talking about immigration enforcement or economic growth. He's on defense, and that's a bad place for any president to be. Now, let me walk you through exactly what the appeals court said in this ruling because the decision is pretty damning. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals, that's the federal appellate court that covers New York, they looked at his arguments for overturning the verdict and basically said, none of this has merit. Let's start with the free speech argument. His lawyers claimed that his statements about Carroll were protected by the First Amendment, that he had a right to defend himself against her accusations, that calling her a liar was just his opinion, not a factual statement that could be defamatory. And the appeals court said, no, that's not how defamation law works. You can express opinions, you can disagree with someone. But when you make false statements of fact that damage someone's reputation, that's defamation. And he didn't just say he disagreed with Carroll's account, he said she made it up. He said it never happened. He said she was lying for money and attention. Those are factual claims. And the jury found they were false. So there's no First Amendment protection for that. You don't get to lie about someone and then hide behind free speech. That's not what the First Amendment is for. Then there's the presidential immunity argument. His lawyers argued that he made these statements while he was president, that he was responding to questions from the press about Carroll's allegations, and that presidents have immunity from civil lawsuits for actions taken in their official capacity. And the appeals court said, yeah, that's true in some contexts, but this isn't one of them. Because defaming a private citizen who accused you of sexual assault, that's not an official presidential duty. That's personal. That's defending his own reputation, not carrying out the responsibilities of his office. So presidential immunity doesn't apply. This is a pretty straightforward ruling on that point. If presidents could claim immunity for any statement they make while in office, they'd be untouchable. They could defame anyone, lie about anyone, destroy anyone's reputation, and face no consequences. And that's obviously not what the founders intended when they created executive immunity. Immunity is for official acts, not for personal vendettas. The appeals court also rejected his argument that the trial was unfair. He claimed the judge was biased, that the jury was stacked against him, that he didn't get a fair shake, but the appeals court reviewed the trial record and found no evidence of bias, no evidence of unfair rulings. The judge followed the law. The jury heard the evidence from both sides. His lawyers had every opportunity to present their defense, and the jury made a decision based on the facts. So there's no basis for overturning the verdict on procedural grounds. And this is important because he makes this argument in basically every case he loses, always claims the judge was biased, always claims the system is rigged. But when appellate courts actually review the record, they almost never find evidence to support those claims. So it's becoming this boy who cried wolf situation where his complaints about unfair treatment are losing credibility because he makes them in every single case, regardless of the actual facts. Now let's talk about the damages. $83 million, that's a huge number. And his lawyers argued it was excessive, that it was punishment for his wealth and political status, not for the actual harm caused by his statements. But the appeals court said no. The jury was within its rights to award punitive damages. Make sure you stay subscribed because punitive damages aren't just about compensating the victim. They're about punishing the defendant and deterring future misconduct. And the jury heard evidence about his net worth. They heard evidence about his continued defamatory statements even after the first trial. They heard evidence that he showed no remorse and no intention of stopping. So they calculated a damages award that would actually get his attention, that would actually make him think twice. And $83 million for someone who claims to be a billionaire, that's what it takes. If the damages were $1 million or $2 million, he wouldn't care. He'd just keep doing it. So the jury went big, and the appeals court said that was appropriate given the circumstances. And here's where the financial pressure really starts to build. Now that the appeals court has upheld the verdict, he has to either pay the $83 million or post a bond while he appeals to the Supreme Court. And posting a bond means finding an insurance company or surety willing to guarantee the full amount. And that's not easy because he's had trouble getting bonds before. Earlier this year, he had to scramble to post a bond in the New York fraud case. He ended up getting a reduced amount, but it was a whole ordeal. And now he's got to do it again for an even bigger sum. And if he can't get a bond, then Carroll's lawyers can start seizing assets. They can go after his properties, his bank accounts, his business holdings, and they can do it while he's sitting in the White House, which creates this really awkward situation where the sitting president is facing asset seizures over a defamation judgment. And that's never happened before in American history. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The UK judgment adds another layer to this financial mess. He sued Orbis Business Intelligence, the company founded by Christopher Steele, over the Steele dossier. That's the intelligence report that alleged he had financial and personal ties to Russia. The dossier was controversial. Some of the allegations were never verified, some were disputed, and he always maintained it was completely false. So he sued Orbis for defamation in the UK courts. But he lost. The court found that Orbis didn't defame him, that the dossier was an intelligence product compiled from various sources, that Orbis disclosed the nature of the information and its varying levels of verification, and that he failed to prove the statements were made with malicious intent. So the case got thrown out. Share this video with everyone you know because under UK law, when you lose a case like that, you have to pay the other side's legal fees. And Orbis racked up a lot of legal fees defending against his lawsuit. Over $600,000 that converts to more than $800,000. And the High Court ordered him to pay. So that's another judgment he's got to deal with. Another check he's got to write. And it all adds up. If you're keeping track, he owes $83 million to Carroll from the second trial, $5 million from the first trial, interest on both verdicts that's been accruing for months, and over $800,000 to Orbis in the UK. The total is pushing $90 million, and that doesn't even include his other ongoing legal battles. The New York fraud case where he originally owed over $400 million but got it reduced on appeal, the Georgia election interference case, the classified documents case. All of these cases have legal fees, all of them have potential judgments, and he's burning through cash fighting them. And yeah, he's got donors, he's got political action committees that help with legal expenses, but there are limits to how much of that money he can use for personal legal bills. And at some point, he's got to dip into his own pockets. He's got to liquidate assets. He's got to take out loans. And that creates financial pressure. That affects his decision-making. That affects his presidency. Because if you're worried about where you're going to get $90 million to pay judgments, you're not fully focused on running the country. And his reaction to all of this has been predictable. He went on Truth Social and called the appeals court decision rigged, said the judges are biased, said it's all part of a political witch hunt designed to take him down. And yeah, his base is going to eat that up. They're going to believe him. They're going to see this as more proof that the system is corrupt and out to get him. But for everyone else, for independents and swing voters, this is starting to look like a pattern. He keeps losing in court. He keeps getting found liable. He keeps getting ordered to pay damages, and his only response is to claim it's all fake and rigged. But at some point, people are going to wonder if every judge and every jury is against him. Maybe the problem isn't the system. Maybe the problem is him. Maybe he actually did the things he's being accused of. And that erosion of credibility, that's dangerous politically, because it undermines his victim narrative. It makes him look less like a martyr and more like a serial defendant who keeps breaking the law and facing consequences. Now let's talk about what this actually means for his presidency and his political future. Because $83 million isn't just a number. It's a concrete judgment that has real consequences. First, let's talk about the financial impact. He's going to have to pay this either directly or through a bond, and that's a massive financial hit. Now, he claims to be a billionaire, says he's got plenty of money, but we don't really know that for sure because he's never released his tax returns. We don't know his actual net worth. We don't know how liquid his assets are. We know he's got properties. We know he's got businesses. But a lot of that wealth is tied up in real estate. It's not cash sitting in a bank account. So coming up with $83 million in liquid funds, that might actually be a problem. He might have to sell properties. He might have to take out loans against his assets. He might have to make deals with lenders that put restrictions on how he operates his businesses. And all of that creates financial stress that affects his ability to function as president. Second, there's the political impact. Democrats are already using this judgment as ammunition. They're running ads highlighting his legal troubles. They're pointing to the Carroll case as evidence that he's someone who defames women. And that's a powerful message, especially with female voters, especially with suburban women who have been moving away from him in recent elections. So this judgment, it's not just a financial problem. It's a political liability. It gives Democrats a concrete example of him being held accountable for his actions. And they're going to hammer that message all the way through the 2026 midterms. They're going to say this is who he is. Someone who keeps losing in court because the evidence against him is overwhelming. And that message is going to resonate with some voters. Not all of them, but enough to potentially flip some close races. Third, let's talk about the Supreme Court angle. He says he's going to appeal to the Supreme Court. And yeah, he has the right to ask. But legal experts are saying the court probably won't take the case because there's no circuit split here. There's no novel legal question that needs to be resolved. This is a straightforward defamation case that was decided based on well-established law. The appeals court applied existing precedent and found no error in the trial. So there's no compelling reason for the Supreme Court to intervene. And even if they did take the case, there's no guarantee they'd rule in his favor because this isn't a political question. This is a defamation case with clear evidence that he made false statements. So his Supreme Court appeal, it's probably going to fail. And when it does, he's out of options. He has to pay. And that deadline is going to come fast. Fourth, let's talk about the asset seizure possibility. If he doesn't pay or post a bond, Carroll's lawyers can start seizing assets. And they will. Because Carroll's been fighting this case for years. She's invested a ton of time and money, and she's not going to just let him walk away. So her lawyers are going to go after his properties. They're going to target Mar-a-Lago. They're going to go after his golf courses. They're going to freeze bank accounts. And the optics of that are terrible. Imagine the headlines. President's assets seized over defamation judgment. President forced to sell properties to pay victim. Those are devastating headlines, and they're going to dominate the news cycle. And he won't be able to spin it because the judgment is final. The appeals court upheld it. So it's not a witch hunt anymore. It's an enforceable court order, and that changes the narrative. Fifth, let's talk about how this affects his relationship with his supporters. Because up until now, his base has been willing to believe that all of his legal troubles are fabricated, that it's all political persecution. But when he actually has to write a check for $83 million when assets actually get seized, it becomes harder to maintain that narrative because real consequences are happening, and his supporters are going to start asking if this was all fake, why is he paying? Why isn't he fighting harder? And he's going to say, I am fighting, the system is just rigged. But at some point, that excuse wears thin. At some point, people wonder if maybe he actually did what he's accused of. And that creates doubt, and doubt is dangerous for a political movement built entirely on loyalty to one person. Sixth, let's talk about the comparison to other legal cases because he's also dealing with the New York fraud case. That's the one where he was originally ordered to pay over $400 million for inflating the value of his assets to get better loan terms. He appealed that judgment and got it reduced significantly, but he still owes money and he's still fighting it. So when you combine the Carroll judgments with the fraud case, with the UK judgment, with all the other legal fees he's racking up, he's burning through cash at an alarming rate. And that affects his political operation. Because money he's spending on legal bills is money he's not spending on campaigning, money he's not spending on ads, money he's not spending on building a ground game for 2026. And Republicans are starting to notice. They're starting to worry that his legal problems are draining resources that could be used to win elections. And that's creating tension within the party. Seventh, let's talk about the timing, because this judgment is being enforced right now in the middle of his second term, at a time when he should be focused on governing, on implementing his agenda, on racking up policy wins that he can point to in 26. But instead, he's dealing with court orders and asset seizures and legal appeals. And that's a massive distraction. It takes time away from his job. It takes mental energy away from decision making. And it makes him look weak because he's constantly on the defensive, constantly fighting battles from his past, constantly having to explain why he's being ordered to pay tens of millions of dollars. And that's not the image of strength that he wants to project. That's not the image his supporters want to see. So the timing of this enforcement, it couldn't be worse for him politically. Eighth, and this is important, let's talk about what this says about accountability. Because for years, he's operated with a sense of impunity. He's said and done things that would end anyone else's career, and he's gotten away with it. His supporters have stuck by him. His party has protected him, and he's faced very few real consequences. But this Carroll judgment, this is a real consequence. This is $83 million he actually has to pay. This is a jury of ordinary Americans who heard the evidence and said, yeah, you did this and you're going to be held accountable, and that matters. Because it shows that the system can work, that even powerful people can be held responsible for their actions. And that's an important precedent, not just for him, but for everyone. Because if he can be held accountable, anyone can be. And that's how democracy is supposed to function. So where does this all go from here? Well, he's going to keep fighting. He's going to file his Supreme Court appeal, even though it's probably going to fail. He's going to keep attacking Carroll on Truth Social, even though that could expose him to more defamation claims. He's going to keep claiming this is all rigged and political, but the clock is ticking. The judgment is final, and at some point very soon, he's either going to pay or start losing assets. And when that happens, it's going to be a major story. It's going to dominate headlines, and it's going to hurt him politically because it proves that his legal problems aren't just made-up scandals. They're real judgments with real consequences. And voters are going to see that. They're going to see someone who can't escape his past, who keeps losing in court, who keeps having to pay for the harm he's caused. And that's not a good look. Not for someone trying to lead the country. Not for someone trying to hold his party together. Not for someone trying to win elections. This story continues. Stay tuned.